Hi, I'm Adam, and this is Beneath the Surface, a channel designed to take you beneath the surface of your daily devotional readings into the depths of God's Word where treasures abound. There are things lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered that will awaken a fire in you for God's Word. BTS Studies is here to help you find them. Can rocks talk? Can they worship? Or does Jesus mean something else when he warns the stones will cry out? That's the question I want to answer in this short video, so let's dive in. In Luke 19:40, Jesus responds to the Pharisees who demand that he silence the crowd that is worshiping him. He responds, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." Now that's an interesting statement, and it's given rise to several explanations. What did Jesus mean? That's the question I want to answer here. First, let me set the scene. Jesus' statement is at the tail end of the triumphal entry as accounted in the Gospel of Luke. He's riding a borrowed colt into Jerusalem, and he is on his way down the Mount of Olives. And his followers are throwing their cloaks on the road, rejoicing and praising God, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Now, perhaps it was the entire scene, or maybe just the fact that the crowd was referencing Psalm 118, a messianic psalm. Either way, it was too much for the Pharisees, who demanded Jesus rebuke his disciples. It is this demand that prompts Jesus to say, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. Now, it's important to note that the particular praise the crowd was offering is a messianic phrase. The Complete Jewish Study Bible states it was the way people of the day were taught to welcome the Messiah. Now, this would not have escaped the Pharisees, who were obviously bothered by it. Now, additionally, it's worth noting that Jesus was descending the Mount of Olives coming into Jerusalem. The view in Jesus' day would have been just magnificent, and this is significant in understanding what Jesus meant. Jesus and all who were with him would have experienced a panoramic view of the Temple Mount. As you descend the Mount of Olives, the western slope of the Mount of Olives, you face directly west, looking across the Kidron Valley. The Temple Mount would have dominated the view, especially the Herodian temple, the second temple, and it would have been shining in the sun. Now, from this vantage point, the eastern gate, the Golden Gate as it's called, is visible facing the Mount of Olives. Josephus, a first century Jewish historian, said the temple was covered in gold and white stone, so that in the sun it blazed with such a fiery splendor that it could blind the eyes. Now, also in view are Jerusalem's city walls. The walls of Jerusalem that were rebuilt by Nehemiah and improved by Herod would have been seen stretching around the city. So when Jesus tells the Pharisees that the very stones would cry out, it seems to me to be very specific. It seems to mean more than the stones on the ground around them. Perhaps he means the stones that make up the city's walls or even the temple itself. And there's some scriptural basis for this idea, and we would expect the Pharisees to catch the meaning. First, there's the reference from Habakkuk 2 that lends some credibility to the idea. Habakkuk 2:11 reads, "For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond." Now, this is part of a warning against the Chaldeans or the Babylonians for the destruction they had brought about and would continue to bring about. Verse 17 states, "The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beast that terrified them, for the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them." Now, what's being implied here is that the stones cry out from the wall and the beam from the woodwork responding means destruction is coming. Walls will be laid flat in response to the devastation they wrought, or in judgment for the devastation that the Chaldeans wrought. Now, there's further biblical evidence beyond this that supports the idea that the stones of the city and the temple would be what would cry out. And this is highly relevant to what Jesus is talking about, especially to the Pharisees, because the scriptural references are from within the Torah. Two places within Torah warn that destruction will come upon Israel if they're not faithful to God. So Leviticus 26, 27, and 28 states, But if in spite of this you will not listen to me, but will walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you in fury, and I myself will discipline you sevenfold for your sin. A few verses later, we see what it looks like for Israel to walk contrary to God and for God to respond in like manner. In verse 31, God says, "And I will lay your cities waste and will make your sanctuaries desolate." Now, Deuteronomy 28 and 29 states the same thing. If the Israelites fail to follow God, he promises to besiege their towns. This is Deuteronomy 28:52. "They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you in all your towns throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you." Now, the fortified walls evoke thoughts of Jesus' view as he descends the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. He and everyone with him had a clear view of the walls of the city. The stones of the walls in the temple are the stones that will cry out. Now that begs the question though, how so? How do the rocks cry out? Well, many have suggested that the stones themselves will be empowered with a voice and cry out. The New American Commentary suggests just that. It states, the verse is capable of several interpretations. The most likely is, if the disciples would stop their praising of God and his Son, then the stones would take their place and cry out praise in their stead. Now, I. Howard Marshall, in his commentary on Luke, gives 4 different interpretations. The first 2 are as follows. Number 1, it is no more possible for the disciples to keep silent than it is for stones to speak. Then number 2 is, if the disciples keep silent, the stones will be forced to proclaim the mighty acts of God instead of them. In other words, they'll speak. The rocks will cry out. It isn't until number 4 that he mentions the idea outlined in Deuteronomy about the fortified walls. Number 4 states, "To the stones crying out against the people who rejected Jesus and silenced the disciples." And then he references another scholar named Schlater, who thinks that the reference is not to the stones speaking, but to the testimony of their being overthrown in AD 70. Now, I agree with this and with Schlater, and I believe there's biblical support for the assertion. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 29. When the people fail to serve God and turn to the gods of the surrounding nations, the Lord will bring against them all the curses found in Deuteronomy 28, including tearing down the fortified walls, as we mentioned before. Then in chapter 29, verse 22, we read this, "And the next generation, your children who rise up after you, and the foreigner who comes from a far land will say, when they see the afflictions of the land and the sickness with which the Lord has made it sick." So you have foreigners coming in and they're seeing the city laid waste. Then in verse 25 through 28, we read this. So this is what they think. "Then people will say, it's because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt, and went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they had not known and whom he had not allotted to them. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was kindled against this land, bringing upon it all the curses written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger and fury and great wrath, and cast them into another land, as they are this day." So the city lying in desolation is a testimony against the people. They rejected their God and went after other gods. They were unfaithful. The city that God protected was abandoned, and its destruction proves it. When stones, which once made a magnificent temple and fortified walls around Jerusalem, lie in ruin, this is proof that God had abandoned his people. But for a purpose, they abandoned him. Now, these stones testify of the people's unfaithfulness, of the unfaithfulness of the people of God. He would only abandon his house and city because of the unfaithfulness of his people. Now, we can be sure this is what Jesus meant because of what comes next in Luke chapter 19. Verses 41 through 44 read like this. "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side, and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation." Jesus, though he was worshipped as the Messiah by the crowds, crying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," understands what's coming next. He knows that in just a short period, the people will turn on him and demand his life. What he said to the Pharisees will come true. And after 40 years of grace and mercy through the preaching of the gospel, the words of Jesus did come true. The walls of the city and temple would crowd in testimony against the people of Jerusalem. Their city was besieged by the Romans in AD 66, just as Leviticus promised in return for unfaithfulness. Then in AD 70, the walls of the city were breached, and the walls and the temple were brought to rubble, as promised by Deuteronomy 28 and 29. Jesus never implied the rocks would cry out with voices if the people of Jerusalem did not. He said what he said because he anticipated the rejection that was to come. He knew that God's wrath would be poured out on Jerusalem, and the stones would testify against the people. But thank God for mercy and for his faithfulness, because he promised return. That will be the subject of another video. Now, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to visit my page for more videos like this one. Subscribe to get notified about new content. I'd also love to hear your feedback in the comments. You can also check out my book, 6 Rules to Understand the Revelation, where I cover a lot of topics just like this one. I'll link it in the description. Thanks for watching.